So here we've got a busted stabiliser. It's cracked right deep within the body of the cord and the wing, and it's still together and it's still in position. If it wasn't in position before epoxying it and getting it into a drying state, I'd need to make a little timber die and obviously get it in position. So here we are, just grinding it all out. You want to grind out all of the crack and grind it wide. You just you're in for a penny, in for a pound. You just want to rip it all out. Keep it in enough of the material there so that if it is sitting in position, you don't have to reset it. If it's out of position, like I say, just grind it down to where you're happy the crack's gone, and then you'd have to set it up in die. So here we've got to go top and bottom. There's any serious break like this is always going to cause a crack up the top and the bottom, or vice versa. One's sort of stretching, the other's compressing. And definitely wearing some sort of respirator, because you don't want to breathe in aspirated carbon fibre. That's not good for you. So, cutting it down further, you actually get down to the axis. Stabilisers have a little bit of timber in there, and that's fine. You're just ignoring that. Basically, you're going to be replacing that. That's obviously just there as a setting point for the manufacturing process, I would assume. I don't know. And so you can see it's still wobbling there a little bit, but we're getting most of the crack out. There's a couple of tiny little spots. So I've taken all the material I want out and I've sanded it around the area because I want to refill it, and I want a bit of extra strength in that. So that's why I've taken out material, not just at the crack, but wide of the crack, and then sanded it with like a heavy, like an 80 grit sandpaper out wider. And that's where we're going to refill it. So you'll need some carbon fibre. You can get that. You can order it online, but this is actually Doug Chapman whipped us a bit of this stuff, a board maker. All these offcuts and bits and pieces they don't use. So you can get it from a board maker, or you can get someone, to order it. You don't need much, obviously. It's just little offcuts. So I just want to fill it right up. So I want it totally filled up, because you're going to sand it back, and it is going to take a few goes. So on both sides, and I'll do both sides at once, and you just put some tape over it. So this top bit, with both sides, just fill it up. First of all, don't put any carbon fibre on it, just let it soak in, so I can get into all the little nooks and crannies and all the scratches that you've produced, which is where it's going to get its grip from. And then put a layer on top of that, let that sort of soak in, add more, and keep doing it until the amount that you're putting on top of it is so it's a lump. So you've got a high point that you're going to sand back, and it's going to sand down to the level you want it. And as I say, if you're doing this on a board, it's fairly straightforward if you just want to get back on the water, because as long as it's smooth, you barely have to sort of sand it anyway. The challenge with a board is if it's foam, that you need to have it cooling down, not heating up, otherwise it'll push out air bubbles. But in the case of a stabiliser like this, there's no hollow core at all, so all you're doing is just covering it, filling it up. It's just a hard fill, a solid fill. So just working that on, you just keep adding it and let it soak up so that it just becomes one big mass of epoxy and carbon fibre. And clearly, like that, it's higher. Then I just get some tape and stick over that. for no other reason, just to keep it in place and let it harden. So this is just regular painter's type masking tape, because that'll come off. You could use peel ply, which you can order, and just flip it over, and that'll go about its drying, curing. Easy as. So that'll mean I can flip it over and just do exactly the same on the other side, and again soak it, get your epoxy, soak it all in there nicely. And when I'm putting this in here, I'm trying to build it up a bit, because we're going to have to sand it down so that where the spine meets the wing, you've got that nice little tapering, that smooth tapering, and that's going to take a bit of work. So this is the bulk of the epoxying, and once you do the sanding, sand it all back, then it'll have little pits and imperfections, and then sort of laminate it again, give another sand. And as I was saying, this is not a, yes, it's far quicker and easier just to get another stabilizer from your favourite supplier, but this was more a process of seeing how well this could be repaired, and give someone a job and they'll be happy. This same process is for any kind of repair, really, is that I like to put the epoxy down, get it soaking in, put the carbon fibre or the fiberglass on it, and then just keep adding it. And this platinum epoxy is pretty good for that. You can't use something like this for like a big massive hole. You've got to fill it up with foam and Q-cell and do those sorts of things, because this stuff gets quite hot if there's too much of it. This is really for laminating. So I've sort of lengthened out the video a little bit here, and obviously most people just skip forward. That's fine. It's just for people who want to really see any sort of component of the effort that goes in and how you actually do it. And I'm trying to mimic the other side, because the other side does have that nice shaped taper, and it's going to have to be sanded into that shape, and that's going to take a bit of time. So this really doesn't take all that long. Most of the work is from sanding and then relaminating and resanding and checking the height. So you'll see as we go into the video that I'll be using the calipers to check the cord thickness, because if this stabilizer is going to work again and work efficiently, it's got to be right, and so that's where a lot of that time came in. And as being a bit of a perfectionist, I really wanted it to be good and work. If you're going to put some time in it, you might as well do it properly. A lot of people have trouble with, and in the early days I had trouble with getting the epoxy setting right, and it's important to really look closely at the manufacturer's requirements for the portions and how you portion it out, and make sure that you put time into that. Some epoxy, it might be 50-50. Quite often the more you get to a 2 parts epoxy, 1 part hardener, or 2 parts resin, 1 part hardener, and beyond that, the better and stronger the epoxy generally is. It's not necessarily always the case. So here, this is peel ply, and peel ply is just a really nice material that you can put over the top of epoxy resins, and when it hardens you can actually peel it off, and it's a lot smoother than it would be if you hadn't sort of done that, and it just peels off quite easily. That's quite handy. And there I'm just trying to sort of just give it a little bit of a push and a bit of shape up into the tapering part where it goes onto the spine. Now obviously you need to get it off the table, otherwise when you come back in the morning you'll just have a bench that now has a stabilizer firmly glued to it. So I just made a little cardboard stand, and as I said, if it now, this would be the time that had it not been in position, like if it was skewed off, then I would have used a timber setup, made a little timber setup, and forced it into submission and got it into its right angle, and then that's it. Now all hardened. My favourite method of sanding any kind of board or fins or stabilisers is wet and dry. You're just reducing any aspiration, you're not breathing anything in. And I've just sort of started off here with an 80 grit, and I was just spraying the water on, but as you sort of start to get into it, I just use a bucket of water and just dip it in the bucket of water, and that keeps the sandpaper going. So start off with an 80 grit. That'll start to get it down, and this is where the time and effort goes into it. You got to use a block, obviously, because you're trying to get things nice and square, and just keep checking yourself as you go, and just accept that this is not going to be a one sand job. It's got to be re-laminated. You've got to put a hot coat on it a couple of times just to fill up the gaps and get your measurements right. But you know, it's good fun, and it's a great sense of achievement. After I wrote it again, worked beautifully. So just sanding and checking and sanding and checking, and then as you'll see, putting the effort into, once I'm getting it down to like a there, it's obviously still got a fair bit of work, but there's a few imperfections in there, and I still know no better way except running your finger over it. Be careful of the carbon fibre if you've got loose ends. So here we go again, it's just sand and sand and sand, and then rechecking it with the calipers to see how the thickness is going. Using a good block is really important, but just don't get carried away, otherwise you're going to take out more material. So in here I did actually sort of sand it down a little bit more than the thickness of the actual cord, and so I had to add some more material to it. So just dipping it in the bucket, keep sanding. Just wet and dry is just the best way to go with any board material, in my opinion. And just running my finger over it to feel for imperfections. So this is the finicky part of the job, and this is where if you're doing a board repair you'd probably be done with it. But here I really want it to be the same as on symmetrical on both sides. So I use the caliper just to keep checking, and in this case I actually had less material than on the good side, and got to take a multitude of little measurements. So just checking it for, you know, where that might be. Obviously is on the top or the bottom, which it was obviously quite simple that it was on the bottom, and just making sure that it's all squared up so that when I put the next put the actual hot coat on it, the thicker laminated layer, that I'm confident where I'm sanding it off and that it's going to finish up symmetrical.
$20. I got like $8.
So hot coat it's not really hot, it's just another application of laminating epoxy, and as you can see, it's quite a nice consistency, and that's the sort of epoxy that you want. You don't want a super runny material. And then this is just letting it run off with a little bit of tape on either side to sort of keep it in position. And that just gives it obviously another layer, which you can then sand back again. And that's just, there's no real other way of achieving a good finish. I'm just letting gravity do its job there for a while, but then you've just got to set it up on a nice level spot and just let it go off. Then there was lots more sanding, and then I did it again, and then it ended up being the same height and the same symmetry on both sides, and there was a little bit of a defect. I actually filled it again, and then I wrote it, and it worked like a treat.